Hello everyone! Welcome to Business School 101. As you probably already know, every society must have a political system in order to maintain recognized procedures for allocating valued resources. In large, complex societies, many decisions must be made about the rights and responsibilities of citizens. For a society to be orderly, its members must obey the rules that are established. A society's political institution determines and enforces the laws as well as punishes those who disobey them. This video will discuss the two major political systems in the world, democracy and totalitarianism. Democracy refers to a political system in which government is by the people, exercised either directly or through elected representatives. The pure form of democracy, as originally practiced by several city-states in ancient Greece, is based on the belief that citizens should be directly involved in decision-making. In advanced societies with populations in the tens or hundreds of millions, direct democracy is impractical. Most modern democratic nations practice representative democracy, also known as indirect democracy. Representative democracy is a form of government in which the people elect officials to create laws and policies on their behalf. In today's world, nearly 60% of countries employ a form of government based on representative democracy. Common characteristics of representative democracies include the following. First, freedom of expression. A constitutional right in most democracies, freedom of expression ideally grants the right to voice one's opinion freely and without fear of punishment. Second, periodic elections. Each elected representative serves for a limited period of time. Afterwards, the people decide whether to retain that representative or not. If elected representatives fail to perform their jobs adequately, then they will be voted out of office during the next election. Third, full civil and property rights. Civil rights include freedom of speech, freedom to organize political parties, and the right to a fair trial. Property rights are the privileges and duties of property owners. Property includes homes, cars, businesses, and more. Fourth, minority rights. In theory, democracies try to preserve peaceful coexistence among groups of people with diverse cultural, ethnic, and racial backgrounds. Ideally, the same privileges extend equally to each group regardless of its numbers of members. Last, non-political bureaucracies. Bureaucracy is a part of the government that enacts the rules and laws passed by elected representatives. Bureaucrats must implement decisions according to the views of the people's representatives, regardless of their own party affiliations. Representative democracy is the most prevalent form of government, and it has both advantages and disadvantages. Its major advantages include the following. First, it's efficient. A single elected official represents the desires of a large number of people. In the US, for example, just 2 senators represent all of the people in their states. By conducting a limited number of national elections, countries with representative democracies save time and money that can then be devoted to other public needs. Second, it's empowering. The people of each of the country's political subdivisions, such as state, district, and region, choose the representatives who will make their voices heard by the national government. If those representatives fail to meet the expectations of their constituents, then the voters can replace them in the next election. Third, it encourages participation. When people are confident that they have a say in their government's decisions, they are more likely to remain aware of the issues that are affecting their country and vote as a way of making their opinions on those issues heard. Despite these advantages, representative democracy also suffers several limitations. First, it's not always reliable. The votes of elected officials in a representative democracy may not always reflect the will of the people. The officials are not bound by law to vote the way that the people who elected them want them to vote. Second, it can become inefficient. Governments that are shaped by representative democracy may develop into massive bureaucracies which are notoriously slow to take action, especially on momentous issues. Third, it can induce corruption. Candidates may misrepresent their stances on issues or policy goals in order to achieve political power. Then, while in office, politicians may act in the service of personal financial gain rather than for the benefit of their constituents. Now, let's study the opposite of democracy, totalitarianism. Totalitarianism is a form of government in which one person or political party exercises absolute control over all spheres of human life and prohibits opposing political parties. Totalitarianism governments normally share 3 features. Number 1. Imposed authority. An individual or group forms a political system without the explicit or implicit approval of the people. Leaders often acquire and retain power through military force or fraudulent elections. In some cases, they do come to power through legitimate means, but then remain in office after their terms expire. Number 2. Lack of constitutional guarantees. Totalitarian systems deny citizens the constitutional guarantees woven into the fabric of democratic practice. They limit, abuse, or reject the concepts of freedom of expression, periodic elections, and guaranteed civil, property, and minority rights. Number 3. Restricted participation. Political representation is limited to parties that are sympathetic to the government or to those who pose no credible threat. In most cases, political opposition is completely banned, and dissidents are severely punished. Generally, there are 4 major forms of totalitarianism in the world. First, communist totalitarianism. Until recently, the most widespread form of totalitarianism was communist totalitarianism. Communism, however, is in decline worldwide, and most of the Communist Party dictatorships have collapsed since 1989. Exceptions to this trend include China, Vietnam, Laos, North Korea, and Cuba, although most of these states exhibit clear signs that the Communist Party's monopoly on political power is retreating. In many respects, the governments of China, Vietnam, and Laos are communist in name only, since those nations now adhere to market-based economic systems. Second, theocratic totalitarianism. Theocratic totalitarianism is found in countries where political power is monopolized by a party, group, or individual that governs according to religious principles. The most common form of theocratic totalitarianism is based on Islam and is exemplified by states such as Iran and Saudi Arabia. These nations limit freedom of political and religious expression with laws based on Islamic principles. Third, tribal totalitarianism. Tribal totalitarianism has arisen from time to time in African countries such as Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya. The borders of most African states reflect the administrative boundaries drawn by the old European colonial powers rather than tribal realities. Indeed, the typical African country contains a number of tribes. For example, in Kenya, there are more than 40 different tribes. Tribal totalitarianism occurs when a political party that represents the interest of a particular tribe monopolizes power. One-party states like this still exist in Africa today. Fourth, right-wing totalitarianism. Right-wing totalitarianism generally permits some individual economic freedom, but often restricts individual political freedom on the grounds that it would lead to a rise of communism. A common feature of many right-wing dictatorships is an overt hostility to socialist or communist ideas. Many right-wing totalitarian governments are backed by the military, and in some cases, the government may be made up of military officers. The fascist regimes that ruled Germany and Italy in the 1930s and 1940s were right-wing totalitarian states. Please keep in mind that while totalitarianism and dictatorship are often associated, they are actually 2 distinct institutions. Dictatorship is a form of government in which the ruler has the power to govern without consent of those being governed. A dictator's power can originate from their family, political position, or military authority. Many dictatorships are also totalitarian. Totalitarian governments are those that exert complete control over citizens. They regulate nearly every aspect of public and private behavior. Totalitarianism entails a political system in which the state recognizes no limits to its authority, and it strives to regulate every aspect of public and private life wherever feasible. In other words, dictatorship concerns the source of the governing power and where the power comes from, and totalitarianism concerns the scope of the governing power, or what the government is and the magnitude of its power. Unlike democracy, totalitarianism and dictatorships have many disadvantages and only a few advantages. Those advantages include the following. First, they can provide effective responses during emergency situations. Within a dictatorship or totalitarian country, there is very little red tape. If the dictator decrees that an action should be taken, then it is done. This format can be very useful during a natural disaster or some other form of emergency in that society. Resources can be allocated with one simple command instead of multiple layers of approval, allowing help to be received faster. This advantage is of course based on the assumption that the dictator decides to provide emergency relief in the first place. Second, many dictators come to power through experience. It takes experience to run a country of any size, and for that reason, the structure of a monarchy keeps the training for governing within the family. In a dictatorship, experience comes from first-hand incidents that generate expertise. Think of it like this. You have one person who trained for 4 years in school to be a welder. You have another person who has worked 8 hours a day for the last 10 years as a welder, and both their father and grandfather were welders. Which person would you hire for your next welding job? Third, they can provide a certain level of ruling stability. As we have learned in a democratic country, if the elected representatives fail to perform their jobs adequately, then they will be voted out of office during the next election. When the new representatives arrive, they might completely overturn their predecessors' policies and regulations, which could lead to a level of policy uncertainty. However, governments that are based on dictatorship or totalitarianism often see a single ruler or ruling group in charge for several decades, which creates a certain level of policy consistency. Although totalitarianism and dictatorship do maintain the previously mentioned advantages over democracy, they also suffer a vast number of disadvantages. Number 1. Opposition is rarely permitted. Under most dictatorships, opposition to the ruler or ruling party is seldom allowed. Any public displays of opposition are often met with force, including death warrants being issued for the individuals involved. Many dictators even crack down on private displays of opposition. This means that the dictator remains isolated, the society suffers, and people die because there are no checks and balances unless the dictator permits them. Number 2. Laws can be changed at any time. The speed of implementation that a dictatorship can provide to its society can be beneficial, but it is often used for harm instead. No process is required for laws, procedures, or policies to change under this form of government. The dictator can impose their will on the people at any time for any reason. From the Nazis to modern dictators like Saddam Hussein, history has shown us that dictators often create laws that benefit them and their allies more than they benefit the average person. Number 3. The nation becomes isolated just like the leadership. Cuba is an excellent example of the isolationism that a culture faces when being ruled by a dictatorship. When Fidel Castro took over the government, it led to a slow decline of international relationships over several decades. Some countries implemented complete economic restrictions in response to Castro's actions. Some of those economic restrictions have been either eased or eliminated, but the toll on society has left permanent scars. Number 4. Ruling by fear is a common action within a dictatorship. Based on many historians' studies, Adolf Hitler is believed to have killed a total of 18 million people in a quest to achieve his vision of perfection. Joseph Stalin is also credited with killing around 40 million people during his reign. Number 5. Personal rights are often restricted, if not completely eliminated. Within a dictatorship or a totalitarian political system, the goal is to create population control. One method of accomplishing this is through the creation of a police state. Another is to restrict or eliminate personal rights of individuals within that society. Common restrictions involve free speech, access to certain religions, or even access to the internet. This suppression may increase a government's control for a short time, but it often creates long-term problems that sometimes end in violence. Number 6. They create a disinterest within the society. Because there is such oppression of the general population under a dictatorship, the end result is often a lack of personal initiative. Individuals tend to become focused on providing the complete obedience that is required of them so that they can maintain a semblance of a life with their families. Most become indifferent to the government because they lose their long-term vision in an effort to survive another day. Over time, this creates a government that is one-sided and will eventually fall. Now, let's wrap up today's discussion with a brief summary. In this video, we examine the two major types of political systems in the world, and they are vastly different. Democracy refers to a political system in which government is by the people, exercised either directly or through elected representatives. Nearly 60% of the world's countries employ a form of government based on representative democracy. Contrarily, totalitarianism is a form of government in which one person or political party exercises absolute control over all spheres of human life and prohibits opposing political parties. Totalitarianism is often associated with dictatorship, but there are some key differences. Dictatorship is a form of government in which the ruler has the power to govern without the consent of those being governed. Therefore, dictatorship concerns the source of the governing power, while totalitarianism concerns the scope of the governing power. So, do you have any thoughts about the two major political systems in the world? Please leave your thoughts in a comment below. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.